Hey there, grade four. So today we're going to be doing another lesson, taking a look at the area of a rectangle. I had you do the one sort of quick lesson on Friday where you were asked to determine what the area of a shape was by counting the squares. So let's go and review what we've learned already. So we know that area is the shape is the space inside a shape. So in this particular case, for this particular rectangle, the area is that green section, right? The space inside that shape, that's the area. And if we had to go and actually calculate it or figure it out, we just count the boxes. And all we have to do is measure the number of squares. And if we counted them, we would find that there were 8 squares. So the area of that particular rectangle is 8 squares. So what I want you to consider, however, is I want to take this a little further when it comes to talking using math language, because we don't go around and measure a space on, say, for example, your floor of your bedroom. If you wanted to put carpet down in squares and say, I want this many squares of carpet, because no one knows what you're talking about when you say this many squares. So what we do is we measure those squares. So you'll notice that I'm using Centa grid paper here. These are 1 by 1 centimeter squares. And I mean, it's virtual, so let's just pretend. But if I use my ruler there, you can see that it is 1 centimeter wide. So we are in fact using squares for this particular lesson that are 1 centimeter wide and 1 centimeter tall. So each one of these squares is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. And since each square is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, we call them square centimeters. So basically what that means is I have a square and it's a centimeter by a centimeter. All right. We wouldn't use rectangles because rectangles have a different length and width. We talk about squares. And so square centimeters is how we use or measure the area inside a shape. We can also use other size squares. So for example, if you are going to measure the floor of your bedroom to put in carpet, you're not going to talk about square centimeters because your room's too big. So probably you're going to talk about square meters, right? So in that case, you talk about square meters, or maybe we're talking about something really, really small, then we might say square millimeters, right? So it's still a square, it's just the sides are a little bigger, like in the case of a meter, or smaller in the case of a millimeter, but we call those square centimeters. For our purposes in this lesson, we're looking at square centimeters, and most of the measuring you do this year and going forward, even in grade 5, 6, 7, and 8, is going to be in square centimeters because we're not going to be using stuff that's too big. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So square centimeters are just the main way we measure the area of a shape. Just like centimeter is written cm, square centimeters is written like this: centimeters with a little 2 above it. You'll notice that the 2 is smaller and it's up above the centimeter. All right. That when we put a 2 there, that stands for square. We say centimeter squared. And I'll explain a little bit more why a 2 is used there. I know it's a bit confusing. You're like, how does a 2 sound like the word square? And I know that's confusing. It'll come a little clearer to you later on, but for now, just trust me on this one. It's centimeters with a 2, and we pronounce that square centimeters or centimeters squared. So let's go forward and take a look then at this rectangle. If it's 8 squares and each of the squares is a centimeter, then we're actually going to measure that and write it as 8 centimeters squared with the 2 there. That's how we would say that, 8 centimeters squared. All right, so that's sort of how we're going to be talking about area in math going forward. Let's take a look at this one. This is a different rectangle. It's bigger. So I've counted the squares here, 1 to 8. Here we've got a larger rectangle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There are 15 squares, or 15 centimeters squared, or 15 square centimeters. You can say square centimeters, you can say centimeters squared. Both are correct. So that's sort of how we're going to talk about area going forward in this lesson. However, there's actually an easier way to calculate this. Can you imagine if this was a really big rectangle? Say it went all the way over here. That'd be a bit troublesome having to count every single square, right? Going all the way across. It'd be pretty easy to make a mistake too. So I want you to think about this. Let's take a look again at our first rectangle. We counted them before: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But what do we really have in this rectangle? We have 2 rows 1, 2. So there's my first row, there's my second row, and we have 4 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4. What we really have in this rectangle are 4 columns 2 times, all right? Column 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 of them, and we have it twice. Once, twice, all right? So we actually have 4 columns in 2 times. Well, the way of writing 4 columns 2 times in math is to just write it as 4 times 2 or 2 times, right? So I've got 4 and I've got it twice. Where's my first 4? Here's my second 4. I'm taking the number of columns and I'm multiplying it by how many rows I have or how many of those groups of 4, right? It's sort of like an array if you were doing multiplication. It's the same sort of deal. I've got 4 and I've got it twice. So I go 4 times 2 equals 8 centimeters squared or 8 square centimeters. Let's take a look at the other rectangle we did, this bigger one here. Uh-oh, it got cut off. Just one second. There we go. So um, I'm going to change the view here to make it look a little better. Zoom entire page. Okay, oh, that's good enough. So here I've got 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and 5 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, since these are centimeters, we can also say we have 3 centimeters. If I was to measure this with my ruler, I go 1, 2, 3, or I can just count them because I know it's centipaper. So I've got 1, 2, 3 centimeters, and down I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's really 5 rows and 3 columns, but it's actually, if I measured it, 3 centimeters and 5 centimeters. All right, so it's the same deal as up here. I've got actually, whoops, 3 centimeters 5 times. Here's my 3 centimeters, and I've got that 5 times. 2, 3, 4, 5. So all I have to do again is the multiplication. 3 centimeters times 5 centimeters equals 15 centimeters squared. So that's how you use a math formula, right? So this is sort of like a formula. It's a strategy for solving these problems to make the job actually a lot easier. And guess what? You can even use a calculator for these problems if you want. So it makes it a lot easier than having to count every single one of these boxes. Now, this is a fairly small one, but what if I gave you a bigger one, right? So let's take a look at these 2 problems. These ones are bigger, right? I've got 2 centimeters this way, or 2 rows, and 8 columns, right? So 8 columns this way. And this one's really big, 5 centimeters down, 8 centimeters wide, right? So here I've got 8, whoops, I'm gonna go up here. I've got 8 centimeters times 2 centimeters equals, and you know, when we did the first unit, we did multiplication tables. You know that 8 times 2 is going to be 16 centimeters. And I'm going to put my little 2 up there. There we go. I'm going to make this a bit smaller so I can fit it all on the screen. All right, so there's my answer, 8 centimeters. And I've got it twice, so I've multiplied it by 2, equals 16 centimeters squared. So this is the same deal. I've got 8 centimeters. I'm going to multiply it by my 5 centimeters, which equals, and you might know this, you can also do a halving and doubling strategy. Double this to 10, half this to 4. So you know that that is 40 centimeters. 40 centimeters. My little 2, smaller because it's got to be small. There you go. So this basically sort of makes the calculation trying to figure out area of a rectangle just a little bit easier because you don't have to count. All right, there's just way too many things that could go wrong. If I have to count every single one of these squares, first of all, it's a bit more difficult. It's a bit tedious. I have to count them all. I have to make sure I didn't miss one, and it would just take a little more time. If I know my multiplication facts, or I can use the halving and doubling strategy, I can do 8 times 5 equals 40, and I know that pretty quickly. 40 centimeters squared is the answer. All right. So this is sort of the important part of all of this. This thing right here. This is what's called the basic formula for doing area of a rectangle. The area of a rectangle is equal to the length of the rectangle, which is this way, the longer side, times the width of the rectangle, which is this way, the shorter side. And what I've been doing here is basically this. To calculate the area, you take the length, which in this case was 8, multiply it by the width, which in this case is 2. This is sort of like when I was talking rows and columns. Really, it's length and width when we talk about geometry. So remember, a lot of the questions are asking you for dimensions. Length and width are the dimensions of this rectangle. That's what it means when it asks a question asks for dimensions. They mean length and width. All right. So I'm going to give you just a few to do as practice. But if you can figure, this is an important. I know there's a lot of information in this particular lesson, but this is an important concept that will take you a long way, and you will be using this over and over and over again. And it actually is a lot easier than counting squares. Sometimes you're not going to have the squares. You're going to have to take your ruler out and measure the rectangle to measure the length and the width and use those values to calculate area. But as long as you know the length and the width, then calculating the area is really easy. Just don't forget the centimeters with the little 2 up above the M there. Awesome. Okay, thanks very much. And try that homework and see how you do.